Donald Trump's patience is clearly running out. The President of the United States speaks in strong terms about the escalating conflict within NATO between the U.S. and Europe.
And you know, it all began with, if you want to know the truth, Greenland. We want Greenland. They don't want to give it to us, and I said, bye-bye.
After the outbreak of war in the Middle East, the situation has escalated further. Spain and Italy have denied the United States the right to use their military bases, and some countries have closed their airspace to American aircraft. The United Kingdom and Germany refuse to support the military operation in Iran.
You look at the Second World War. We didn't have it with the Second World. We helped rebuild all those countries. We rebuilt Germany. How about Germany telling us that, well, it's not their war. We had nothing to do with it. They wanted me to go and tell them everything I was doing. We didn't know anything about it. Well, if I would have told them, they would have leaked it, and we wouldn't have been nearly as successful, possibly, right? Based on their actions.
Earlier, in an interview with the British newspaper The Telegraph, the American leader stated that he would consider the United States' withdrawal from the North Atlantic Alliance. His closest associates, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, spoke in a similar tone.
When we need them to allow us to use their military bases, their answer is no. Then why are we in NATO? You have to ask that question. Why do we have billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, over the years, trillions of dollars, and all these American forces stationed in the region? If we can only use, in our time of need, we're not going to be allowed to use those bases. So I think there's no doubt, unfortunately, after this conflict is concluded, we are going to have to re-examine that relationship.
And as far as NATO is concerned, that's a decision that will be left to the president. But I'll just say a lot has been laid bare. A lot has been shown to the world about what our allies would be willing to do for the United States of America when we undertake an effort of this scope on behalf of the free world. These are missiles that don't even range the United States of America. They range allies and others, and yet when we ask for additional assistance or simple access basing overflight, we get questions or roadblocks or hesitations. And the president's pointing out, you don't have much of an alliance if you have countries that are not willing to stand with you when you need them.
This is not a mere misunderstanding, experts say, but rather the result of a cynical strategy pursued by successive German governments. Berlin, much like Moscow, has never abandoned its imperial ambitions, and since its defeat in World War II, the only obstacle to its domination of Europe has been the very presence of the United States on the old continent. At the moment, Germany wants to use both the war against Ukraine and the war in the Persian Gulf as a factor to weaken NATO and push the United States out of Europe, which is a mortal threat to the Three Seas countries, but also to Sweden, Finland, and the Nordic countries. This is truly a very dangerous game we are dealing with. It is not only about American military dominance, but also economic dominance. The United States is the only global power that consistently grows its economy with every decade, effectively competing with the entire world, including Europe. Instead of reforming itself, instead of moving away from absurd solutions like climate policy, the European Union is trying to somehow break away from America, while the alternatives that are being presented are either completely meaningless or even dangerous to the stability of the entire European economy. This refers to BRICS, an organization based on cooperation among totalitarian states, China, Iran, some South American countries, and Russia. And finally, with our largest European neighbor, namely Russia. I am not saying this because I am here in the East. I say this everywhere else in Germany. Russia is a European country. Calling a spade, BRICS is currently the greatest threat to NATO. The head of German diplomacy openly called for closer relations with the BRICS countries at the Munich Security Conference. At the same conference, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz called for a weakening of European relations with the United States. No one forced us into dependence on the United States. That immaturity was our mistake, but we are leaving that behind us. The sooner the better, not by leaving NATO, NATO, but by building strong pillars based on our interests. These relations are getting worse and worse, not only in terms of cooperation within NATO, but also regarding various other issues, including economic ones. The European Commission's hopes that by aligning with the BRICS countries, by signing various agreements such as Mercosur, or free trade agreements with India, or some agreements with China, that this will save Europe from American competition, are of course pipe dreams. The next step may be the abolition of the veto in the European Union's foreign and security policy. Recently, leading EU politicians have been calling for this with increasing boldness. In these turbulent geopolitical times, we urgently need a Europe capable of taking action, a Europe that cannot keep pace because individual countries can block everything with their veto, becomes a pawn of Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping. Abolishing the veto right would strip any agency from those member states that stand on the side of a strategic alliance with the United States. This is a disastrous decision, a disastrous direction, and God forbid that this continues in this direction, because it will mean the dismantling of NATO, and the countries responsible for the dismantling of NATO will be those that are currently pursuing such irresponsible policies, and among those countries is Germany.
It would in some ways push the world toward a geopolitical jungle in which Europe would be on its own, the United States would be on its own. In some ways, it would be a return to the much more chaotic, anarchic landscape that existed before NATO was formed in 1949.
What would happen to Poland then? History teaches us that without a strong U.S. presence, there might not be a place for us on the map of Europe either. In Toruń, Poland, on the Józef Piłsudski Bridge, a shocking incident involving a naked man took place. A video showing the incident has been posted online. It has been determined that the man was a 25-year-old citizen of Zimbabwe. According to reports, he was following a young woman who, fearing for her safety, took refuge in a taxi. The man was detained by the police and handed over to the Polish border guard, which will now decide his fate. A naked, dark-skinned man walking in the city center just before midnight. He was following a young woman, causing her concern. I didn't know his intentions, but I didn't want to wait and see what would happen, so my instinct told me to get away as quickly as possible. A report of a naked foreigner moving around the bridge area came in just before midnight. Police officers who arrived at the scene detained the man in question and then transported him to a police station. Due to his behavior, an ambulance was called to the scene, and the crew decided to transport the detainee to a specialized medical facility. The man turned out to be a 25-year-old student from Zimbabwe, currently residing in Poland. The Piłsudski Bridge in Toruń, where the incident took place, is one of the city's main thoroughfares. It is such an important place because it is frequently used by our city's residents as they return home from work or from the left bank of our city. The terrified woman who was being followed by the man decided to step into the road to stop a passing car. Fortunately, the woman fleeing from the perpetrator was helped by a taxi driver, who we owe our thanks to. The citizen of Zimbabwe is to be transferred to the border guard with a police request for deportation. This is all a consequence of a violation of public order. This is one of the grounds which, according to Article 302 of the Act on Foreigners, constitutes a basis for, colloquially speaking, the deportation of such a citizen to the country from which he came. It seems that Polish authorities should proceed in this direction. This is not the first serious incident involving a foreign national in Toruń. Last June, a 24-year-old student at Nicholas Copernicus University was brutally attacked and maimed by a 19-year-old Venezuelan while returning from work. She died in the hospital as a result of her injuries. Not so long ago, a tragic murder took place here. In Glazia Park, a student, Miss Claudia, was murdered by a Venezuelan. In fact, a few days ago, experts determined that this person was of sound mind. And now, several months after that terrible incident, we have a very similar situation. These are the cases we know about. The question is, How many more go unreported? There are no clear statistics that the Polish police would share with us. It is a taboo subject. But in practice, residents of an increasing number of towns and cities are realizing that uncontrolled migration can be very dangerous. Residents of Wrocław, Strzelce Opolskie, Warsaw, Lublin, Łódź, and Toruń have already learned this. Fortunately, this time the citizen of Zimbabwe was ultimately apprehended by the police, and the entire incident did not end in tragedy. Nevertheless, the number of disturbing and sometimes drastic incidents involving immigrants in Poland is rising, and this does not inspire optimism.
The opening of the Strait of Hormuz is a prerequisite for any peace negotiations between the United States and Iran. For Iran, this is their last remaining bargaining chip. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight, one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran. In the face of the negotiations' apparent failure and both sides' rejection of each other's ceasefire terms, decisions have already been made in Washington. America's planned operations will make Tel Aviv's recent actions resemble a warm-up before a decisive strike. Yesterday, our pilots destroyed transport planes and dozens of helicopters at an Iranian Air Force base. Today, they attacked rail lines and bridges used by the Revolutionary Guards. These are used to transport raw materials for weapons production and the weapons themselves, which they use to attack us, the United States, and countries in the region, as well as to oppress the Iranian people. And this is the key. These actions are not directed against the Iranian people. On the contrary, they are aimed at weakening and destroying the terrorist regime that has oppressed them for 47 years. Israel is fully coordinating the recent strikes with Washington. This is a requirement that was communicated by the Pentagon following a series of strikes on Iranian refineries 2 weeks ago. There is no room for unilateral action, especially now, at this decisive point in the war.
And I think the nature of the conclusion is ultimately up to the Iranians. I think there really are two pathways, and I'm oversimplifying this a little bit, but I think pathway one is where the Iranians decide they're going to be a normal country. They're not going to fund terrorism anymore. They're going to be part of the world system of commerce and exchange, and that's going to mean much better things for them economically. It's going to mean better things for the peace and safety of the world. It's going to mean a lot of good things for a lot of people all over the planet. That's option A. Okay. Option B is if the Iranians don't come to the table and they stay committed to terrorism, to terrorizing their neighbors, not just Israel, but of course their Arab neighbors too, then the economic situation in Iran is going to continue to be very, very bad, and frankly, it will probably get worse.
The Americans gave a taste of what might await the regime a few days ago by bombing one of Iran's largest road bridges. Beyond its strategic significance, the attack was part of a broader diplomatic ploy.
We were very close to a deal. And then I got a call from Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner, and JD saying, I think they're breaking the deal. I said, tell them that's okay, don't worry about it. But tell them to look out their window and watch. And within 45 minutes, I gave the order to knock out the biggest bridge. I gave the order, knock out the biggest bridge in, I believe, the Middle East, but the biggest bridge in Iran. And within 10 minutes after I gave that order, that bridge was over.
Panic is growing in the region, mainly in countries that could become targets of a potential response from Tehran. Iran has repeatedly threatened that it is capable of attacking key energy and water treatment facilities.
We are in a war in the region.
We are in a state of war in the region that has engulfed us all. All our countries are under attack, with missiles, drones, and strikes on civilian infrastructure. It is far too early to discuss mechanisms for managing the strait, since the security situation cannot currently be guaranteed by any party. The UN is set to vote on a resolution to reopen the strait. It seems, however, that it is already far too late for diplomacy. Tehran is unequivocally declaring resistance and a readiness for further escalation. Our armed forces have already shown that we respond 3 times as strongly to every attack on our infrastructure. We have responded to every act of aggression with a counterattack. If such actions are repeated, we will respond even more forcefully, 3 times as strongly, and the consequences for them will be very serious. The Americans may be preparing a 2-pronged operation. On one hand, massive bombing. On the other, an attempt to land on one of the strategic islands in the Strait of Hormuz. It cannot be ruled out that the airstrikes carried out in recent hours on installations on the island may have been a clearing of the way.
What we really want is we want a world where oil and gas is flowing freely, where people can afford to heat their homes and cool their homes, where people can afford to transport themselves to work. That's not going to happen if the Iranians are engaged in acts of economic terrorism.
With just a few hours left before the ultimatum expires, there are no signs that Iran intends to back down. This means that tonight could mark a turning point and determine not only the fate of this war, but also that of Iran and the entire region.
In one single view.
To bring space closer to us, they had to fly as far away from Earth as possible, to a place where no human had ever been before. The Artemis II crew flew over the dark side of the moon, the side of our natural satellite that is invisible from Earth. What they saw there surprised even these brave, experienced astronauts.
Integrity, Houston.
We saw sites, Oriental, sites that no human has ever seen before, not even in Apollo, and that was amazing for us. And then the surprise of the day, we just came out of an eclipse where the sun, moon, and the entire dark moon about that big right out the window that we were watching. We could see the corona of the sun, and then we could see the planet train line up, and we at Mars, and all of us commented how excited we are to watch this nation and this planet become a 2-planet species.
And that wasn't the end of the surprises, because President Donald Trump was the first to call and congratulate the crew.
Very special hello to Artemis II. Today you've made history and made all America really proud, incredibly proud. We have a lot of things to be proud of lately, but this is there's nothing like what you're doing, circling around the moon.
The key moment of the entire mission was when the Orion spacecraft went behind the moon. The crew then lost contact with Earth for 40 minutes, and physics, specifically the moon's gravity, took the helm, guiding the astronauts through a previously unexplored part of the universe. They had planned literally every minute: observation, photography, and analysis of the silver globe's surface. Until now, there really haven't been such highly professional observations made with the human eye. The human eye is an extraordinary instrument that perceives far more nuances than the eye of a camera or a photographic lens. That is why these observations made by astronauts are extremely valuable when it comes to mapping the moon's surface in terms of elemental composition or natural resources. The silence in the ether was finally broken by the long-awaited voice of mission participant Christina Koch.
It is so great to hear from Earth again. To Asia, Africa, and Oceania, we are looking back at you. We hear you can look up and see the moon right now. We see you too. When we burned this burn towards the moon, I said that we do not leave Earth, but we choose it.
For the first time in over half a century, humans have reached the far side of the moon. But back then, in April 1970, it was a rescue mission for the Apollo 13 crew following an oxygen tank explosion. This time, the Artemis II astronauts deliberately traveled a record-breaking distance of nearly 407,000 kilometers from Earth.
A named crater in honor of our great spacecraft integrity. And so if you were to look at Oriental on the far side and then draw a line straight up to Ohm on the far side, relatively in the middle is an unnamed crater, and we would like to suggest it be called Integrity in the future.
It was the most touching and personal moment of this mission. The astronauts are returning to Earth after a historic journey full of thrills, adventure, and scientific data that will be used in the planned construction of the first base on the Moon. This is primarily a test mission, the goal of which was to test the Orion capsule, and it passed those tests successfully. Its purpose is to transport people to the vicinity of the Moon, while the actual landing on the Moon will be carried out using a lander that has not yet been fully constructed and tested. And above all, this mission was also intended to survey locations that could serve as potential landing sites or sites for future lunar bases. After orbiting the Moon, the astronauts are getting closer to Earth with every passing moment. Landing is expected on Friday. They're already on their way back to the most beautiful planet in the universe.